It's episode 5. It's the Branching Factor podcast. We are here. 5 episodes in. I can't believe we've made it this far, but this is it. We've been building to this moment. This has been the key moment. Getting it all together. We're going to have a big shindig. I'm your host, Tommy Thompson, but of course, what you really want to see is the rest of my wonderful co-hosts. As we see right now, if you're watching us on the video version, everyone is here after 4 episodes of one-on-one. This is our full-on Voltron madness, as all 5 of us are in the same space at once. Anne's barely awake. We're all on our lunch breaks. We don't really know what's going on. Quang's just resurfaced after a month of hard work. It's going to be absolute chaos, but I am happy to bring you here. Please give a warm welcome. First of all, Quang, how are we doing, sir?
Hello. Thanks for having us. Great to be back. I don't know what's going on. I'm very confused, but here we are. Let's do this.
But that's it. Don't know what's going on. I'm slightly confused. That's the episode title. And you're just awake over in the US. How are you?
I was like, oh, I don't need to say anything because Quang already said it for me.
Okay, right. Well, hang on. Let's pivot over to people who are a little bit more plugged in. George, you're out in the wild. How's it going out there?
Out in the wild, it's okay out here, Tommy. It's scary, but we're surviving. I think that's all we can do in life.
We're really bringing the energy down. I thought I'd bring the energy up, given Ben's music is just so intense, and everyone's like, "Oh yeah, so I'm here and it's all right." But yeah, like, Mike, how are you, sir? How are you doing?
Oh, I think I froze for a bit there. I'm feeling good, Tommy. I think you've said hello to me. I'm doing great. I'm glad to be here. It's cold, it's snowy here in London today. But I'm wrapped up warm, had a cup of tea, ready to talk about games.
Fantastic. That's the good kind of like lo-fi vibes that actually maybe we should have went in with at the start of this episode rather than my like super high energy. But yes, it is snowing out here in the UK. Even for myself, just outside of London, we've got quite a lot of snow going on. Typical March. Nothing untoward or uncommon about this particular freak weather incident. But hey, you can't see the weather in a podcast. This is us. It's the Branching Factor podcast. We've got the whole cast here after all of our previous episodes up until now, in which I've sat and interviewed everyone individually to find out why they're awesome and why they're part of this podcast. And not just because I said, oh, please, could you come and help me because I really need some podcast hosts, because I'm stupid enough to start this whole experiment as my internet is collapsing while we're recording. But anyway, the Branching Factor podcast is another gaming podcast because we didn't have enough of these to discuss topics of interest to us. All of us are in and around gaming, whether it's in the games industry, whether we're actual game developers, whether we are games researchers and games scholars. It's all about demystifying all things games. That's what we're doing here. And so we're hoping that you can enjoy it because we're going to discuss things in a moderately intelligent way. And yeah, that's it. So this is the first time we're all here. All 5 of us are here, and I'm super jazzed. Actually, it isn't the first time. And I don't just mean because the internet collapsed on me 10 minutes into this. We did record an unreleased episode because everyone hadn't met before. So like, George and Quang know each other, and Mike and Anne know each other, and I know all of you. But yeah, we'll never air it. Not that it's really juicy or anything.
Radio.
It's too, yeah, that's what it is. No, it's a perfectly. I've listened to it a couple of times. It's great, but just like, it's all good. But yeah, how are we all doing? How are things? No one wants to start. It's been a bit of low energy.
A nice time of the year. I like this time of the year. Spring is just around the corner. The academic year's in full flow now. GDC's coming up. So, well, that's the only bad part is because everyone that we know in the games industry is freaking out. But I don't have to do anything, so I'm fine.
Yeah, I'm freaking out.
Yeah, I like that you have spring behind you.
Yeah,
Mike.
yeah. This is video
Just
content only, but I've got a nice...
Yeah, look out your window and there's spring. It's not snowing.
Are any of you going to GDC?
Sorry, I realised I put my hand up.
Man. Yeah,
in a podcast,
audio
which
content.
Is great.
I've not been to GDC since 2017. It's prohibitively expensive for small indies.
Yeah,
Yes, absolutely.
That was the 1 year I went as well. That's the only time I've been, 2017.
Oh yeah,
I didn't see you there.
Yeah, I didn't move from this one room for the whole 4 days.
Yeah, you were showcasing Rogue Process, right?
I was, yeah. And I
Yeah.
got to speak on the Tech Toolbox. It was a good time, but it's a wild event. I don't know how people do it on a regular basis. I definitely sympathize with you. I hope you have a nice time though, Tommy.
Yeah, so I was going to say for the audience, like if you're not familiar, this is the Game Developers Conference. It runs for about 5 days it runs in the Moscone Center in San Francisco. This is like, so funnily enough, I think in previous episodes we talked about going to develop. So Quang, myself, and George were all there, and it's like that's the big convergence point for like the British games industry. So GDC is like the big convergence point for the entire industry, but as Quang's intimated there, it's prohibitively expensive to get to. The tickets are ridiculously expensive, never mind getting your flights and hotel and whatever. So this is my first time going, and so I'll put my hand up and say, again, great audio content, but I get a free ticket because I'm one of the advisors to the AI Summit, so I help organize one of the tracks that runs at GDC, and that is already taking a huge amount of the cost out of being able to go to the event. And also, we tend to get told when all the hotel reservation things open up, so you tend to be able to book your. So, funnily enough, I did a bit of contract work. I won't say who, but they paid me quite nicely, and I immediately took the money they gave me because I got paid this within a 48-hour window of the GDC hotels opening up, and I immediately booked my hotel and my flight with it. Like the rest of that money, I didn't even see. It was just that is GDC paid for. You know,
Nice.
So that was quite nice to be able to do that. But yeah, I'm excited because I've never done it, and I've put out a thing for people to book appointments with me and stuff like that. And I've actually had a lot of people reach out, going, "Yeah, we'd love to meet you," including people from higher positions than I expect from big companies, going, "Yeah, we've watched your stuff for years, and we'd love to actually meet you." I'm like, "Okay, that's weird." And I even had someone in our Discord server saying, "Oh yeah, you're going to be there. That's great." I'm like, "How will I find you?" I'm like, "Just follow the sound of my voice." Like, just key in on it, which has happened at other events where actually, I still tell that story about when you ran Games Forum in London. I still remember meeting Mark Drew, actually, of the Level Design podcast, because he heard me from the other side of the room, and he was just, "Oh, Tommy's here." And he like keyed, because he didn't know what I looked like, and he's just kind of keying in, and then he found me. And of course, I knew what he looked like because he's always online with his mustache. I was going to say, and you don't know Mark, but he's got a very pronounced mustache. And then subsequently, he was, I think, like he came over, said hi, and he's like, "Have you met Rami Ismail before?" And I'm like, "Not properly. Hey, how you doing?" And then he and I had a conversation about the rats in Fear. There you go. That's my story about people finding me at conferences based on my voice.
I
I
don't
would say
know.
Sorry.
at GDC, it's thousands and thousands of people there. When I went, it was almost impossible to find anyone unless you organize something.
Yeah.
It's insane.
Yes.
I'm tempted to buy more AI in games t-shirts. That way people can just stop me because they'll see it and go, "You're probably the only person that's bought one." And then if I find anyone else that's wearing one, then I know they're a fan. Also, based on the number of sales we've had on the merch store so far, I could probably narrow down who it is. Store.aingames.com. You can even get a Branching Factor t-shirt. Don't you know?
Ooh.
I guess this episode's gonna come out after GDC maybe, but if anyone's listening and maybe they're kind of interested in indie stuff or other things, there is something called Not GDC that runs parallel to GDC, where people put up talks and videos and stuff just to kind of share their expertise in an informal way. So by the time you hear this episode, this year's talks and posts should be up online. And it's got a new website, new organization this year. I can't remember the URL, but if you look for Not GDC on Twitter or Google, you'll find it.
Good call. Because there's always, I think even actually, Quang, you when it developed, you were doing like the Game Maker meetup. So there's always stuff that happens around these bigger events. So even if you aren't going to the main talks or what have you, there's always like so many other relevant adjacent events going on that are worth checking out. Oh,
For the record, no, I'm going to cut you off, Tommy.
No, go it.
For the record, it is not gdc.io is the URL.
Thank you so much.
Fantastic.
I am a big fan of on Twitter the hashtag Not GDC hashtag in terms of people not going in solidarity, so you don't feel as though, because it's very easy to feel the FOMO about GDC because everyone talks about it and it's the big event, But there are way more people not going to GDC than there are actually at GDC, and it's good to remember that's a thing.
Yeah, absolutely. Like it was weird knowing that I was going this year, because it's like, yeah, there is that. I think there is a bit of a rightful stigma that's actually attached to the event in some regards. It is prohibitively expensive. It's also quite exclusionary at times. It can be different. And I say this is fully throwing my hands up as somebody who helps organize it. There's also issues with the fact it takes place in San Francisco. It's a difficult place to get to. It denies people of certain countries to actually get to it, which is an ongoing issue as well. So funnily enough, actually, I'm going to vlog it while I'm there. I wanted to do a sort of, this is what actually this is about, and also just kind of demystify it a little bit of like, ultimately, if GDC probably isn't that dramatic or as exciting as you think from once you've been there, it's another event, which is awesome and great because you get to network and stuff, but it's just another event. Like, I remember talking to people, I went to E3 like a decade ago, and people said to me, oh my God, like, what's E3 like? Like, noisy and noisy. That that was like my number one bit of feedback. Also, Mario Kart 8 is great, I think, was like my general consensus. Because it was the year they had.
Today.
Yep. Every Tuesday and Thursday over in the Discord. George, actually, on that note, it was your birthday recently, was it not?
It was indeed, yes. It was my birthday a couple of days prior to this record. So
Happy birthday.
that was lovely.
Belated.
Thank you. Yes, continuing to be alive. That's an ongoing success.
Good work.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. Like,
Congratulations.
I think one of the important things in life is to always set your expectations low because you can beat it. And I think ongoing survival is just, the most base of expectations. So pleased to be doing that. But it means, yeah, I mean, I've been sort of very busy in terms of the new role and everything. So I missed out on my birthday rules, where you get to set the rules for play in terms of our Mario Kart sessions. So I hope something suitably crazy happened in my absence.
So actually, yeah, so this is the only reason I knew it was your birthday, is because someone in our Mario Kart server maintains a record of everyone's birthdays so that they know, because when it's your birthday, you get special rules. Liam did get his special rules this week, which on Tuesday, which was everyone just races as their me. That was it. Wasn't quite as dramatic. I'm still upset about Violet's one from last year, which was everyone has to be a Yoshi and everyone has to be on one of the bikes. It was
That's
awful.
such a cool idea.
It was,
that.
Yeah.
The worst bit is recently they've added, was it custom item rules now in private games?
Yeah.
So
you now have an extra layer of absolute mayhem if someone chooses to set up basically a sadistic rule set of like bombs and red shells only, where it's like you've got a vague possibility of defending yourself, but it's just absolute madness. So that's fun.
I was going to say that was my birthday. My birthday rules this year were same, any vehicle, any character, 150cc, but the only 4 items available were lightning bolts, blue shells, invincibility stars, and bullet bills. So you couldn't really take it seriously in a competitive sense. I had a lot of negative feedback off the back of that one.
And rightly so.
But maybe we'll have you back, and just because you missed it doesn't mean you don't get the chance. Quang,
I'll come back in.
Yeah, we'll see you at some point. Quang, you're back in the world. You, as you were saying at the start, you've been relatively, offline. You've been super busy, of course, with another run of all your Game Boy games. What's been happening with that? Sounds like you've had a very busy few weeks.
Yeah, so amongst trying to finish our current game we're working on, which is Diffused, a little turn-based puzzle game where you're a robot who diffuses bombs, we also did a third run, physical print run of our previous Game Boy game, Super Jetpack DX, which required me to take pre-orders and then go physically order the boxes, the manuals, the cartridges, the inlays, from various places, get that coordinated, and when they arrive, then I'm going to have to physically put them all together and then distribute them around the world. We sold just shy of 70 copies this time around on this run, which is great. from everywhere from Australia to America to I think Indonesia is some exotic places. I think that I have to send them out to, which is great. Just it's more work that I need to be doing right now because I should be coding, and the game needs to be finished, and I still have to do logistics as well. It's a full-time operation for more than one person.
Sounds like we need to have a special episode of Branching Factor where it's just us all sitting next to each other, like making up the box, putting the manual in, putting the cartridge in, and then it's just like we're just talking through it as like every instance of the game is getting boxed up and ready to ship. It would probably save you a bit of time. Or not. It might actually make things worse, and then you have to go back and do it all over again.
It's like when you have those, you move into a new place and you have a painting party, or your friends come over and help you paint. I have like a boxing party, and people come over and help me box up the games.
Absolutely. Yeah. I'm sure people would love to help, honestly.
I just realized in our video version for everyone who's on video that I'm the only one that still has his surname. So I need to edit that. Mike, you keep talking while I fix this particular conundrum.
How many companies will kind of print Game Boy cartridges? Are there many to choose from, or is it quite a difficult thing to do?
So currently, at the moment, off the top of my head, there's at least 8 publishers that will publish Game Boy games. There are various places that will manufacture the cartridges. I'm doing this. Jetpack DX is done through me only, so I have to source the pieces individually. And I thought for my next game, I'm not doing that again. So our new game, Diffused, is being done through a publisher, and they're going to look after logistics. But because we're doing a third print run of Super Jetpack DX, I'm doing that again physically myself. There are various people who manufacture them. It's a small but a very passionate sector of video games. The retro community is wonderful, and the game community now spans more than just the people who were around at original conception. There are a lot of younger people getting into the modding scene and the chiptune scene, and Game was a big part of that, which is great.
All right, yeah. I'm a big fan of Game Boy chiptune music.
Nice.
You
Actually,
should check out our new game, Diffused. It's got an incredible soundtrack by NE7, who's been around making Game Boy music since the 2000s, if not earlier than that. And it's an incredible soundtrack. I can't wait to have it out in the wild and people hear it.
Amazing.
It's awesome.
I'm checking the notes, and actually 2 things. First of all, the top production team has pointed out they now actually want George to help to actually organise a podcast, because we joked about it in the first episode. And apparently because we're all in the Greater London area, that means we're all 10 minutes from each other. So obviously we can do a podcast. I have no idea. George, is this even feasible? How do we do this?
I think it's pretty straightforward. I think it's the classic thing of everyone gives a rough idea of what their nearest station and or home is, and then we just go and whack basically a pub somewhere in the middle of it. And just, I think the important things are setting it up so that we do it at kind of a sort of a nice dead time for the pub. So, hitting sort of like early afternoon before any kind of rush has sort of settled in, so that we can get that there. Or the other thing is to lean on one of the many gaming pubs and bars around London, heading off to Loading maybe to go and do one. That's probably the winner, because Jimmy will probably just let us in a couple of hours early before the hordes arrive, so we can get in both a podcast record and, most importantly, a delicious pint.
So Anne,
right.
if you want to start packing now,
that's cool. Yeah, I'll meet you there in, I don't know, 12 hours.
Pay for Anne's flight by supporting us at patreon.com/AI. We should make that a stretch goal for the Patreon, is we're going to do a live episode where we fly Anne over to the UK. That should be.
Oh my God, it would be amazing.
I mean, that's hustle, Tommy. I'm loving that hustle. But the other suggestion...
Tommy, can't you fly all of us over to America instead?
Yeah.
That's the second stretch goal.
I was going to say, that's the stretch goal.
Right, I was going to say, this episode is now brought to you by NordVPN, GoodOldGames.com, Squarespace. Just list all these sponsors.
Casper mattresses. Yeah, and then the third stretch goal is that we all fly
to somewhere else.
to the
Yeah.
Caribbean or something. I don't know.
I could work with
Yes,
that.
let's
Yeah,
do that.
Good
Yeah.
acoustics over there, I heard.
yeah, the best I've heard.
Patreon.com/AI and games. You heard it here. I'm gonna have to go and add those stretch goals in now. Oh dear. Right. Well, we take a quick break and then we'll go and quickly. Then we're going to chat about some games. I think chat about what we've been playing. Right. So if you have supported us on Patreon.com/AI and games, your service will not be interrupted. But if you haven't, well, you just got to listen to me read out a bunch of adverts. There we go. That's a perfect return back into the podcast. We're up and running again. We've just solved one of Quang's problems. We're going to get Anne's students to do it for him. Crowdsourcing Game Boy shipping and logistics. Perfect. Let's talk about some video games. What we've been up to. So, George, I was going to say we're going to throw it over to you, sir. I know your time is precious. You wrote down Link's Awakening, and is this actually the original Game Boy one, or are you over in Switchland? What are we doing?
I mean, first of all, Tommy, everyone's time is precious. Make sure you use what you got, everybody. So no, it's not the Game Boy version; it's the Switch version. And I was lucky enough to go to Nepal for a couple of weeks earlier this year for a wedding, and I needed something to keep myself entertained for a fairly long flight. And in between those tiny pockets of time that you have when you're sort of sat in a hotel somewhere, and it kind of felt like the perfect holiday game, really. And I think there were probably like a few reasons for it. So the first one, I think that, like you've alluded it to, because it was originally on the Game Boy and as a handheld game, it's obviously even historically been designed from the ground up to be something that you can sort of pick up, play in fairly short stints. So, everything is sort of nicely divided into kind of like 45, 90-minute sort of bite-sized chunks where if you crack on and really get on with something, you can pretty much go from sort of starting a quest to going all of your way through to the dungeon, get to the boss, beat it, fantastic. So it's perfect for that. But it's also because it's got the literal dreamlike quality to it, because it is, obviously all set within the framework of Link essentially dreaming this while he's basically drowning in an ocean. It creates this kind of spoilers, exactly. That's it. It's apologies to anyone who's not managed to get around to it over the last 25 years. But anyway, the important point was the game itself just sort of really majors in on that whole dreamlike quality, and it creates quite a different feeling and environment to a lot of the other Zelda games, where in sort of one part it's kind of like sort of semi-whimsical, but then also sort of like an interesting kind of undercurrent underneath it. But with that plus the kind of the new art style that they've got for the Switch version, which is almost like toy-like, it just creates this sort of all-round vibe that it is a game to be played when you are on a break. So yeah, that's the big thing that I've played this year. Actually, kept dipping in on all kinds, but that's the one that really stood out.
Did you play the original on the Game Boy?
So I didn't play the original on the Game Boy. I played Oracle of Seasons when that came out, and the Oracle games, I think, are always quite interesting. I mean, especially that kind of sort of sense of having the kind of Pokemon Red, Pokemon Blue kind of a linkage, but within the context of two different Zelda adventures was quite interesting. But yeah, it's the first time that I played it, and as a result, it's immediately kind of jumped into my thinking about which Zelda games I most enjoy anyway. And one of the things that really stands out is the ones that do something quite different, the ones that I tend to be drawn towards. So, Breath of the Wild, obviously kind of breaking the formula and doing something, much more open world. But then prior to Link's Awakening, the other one that stood out was always Majora's Mask. There's that sense of, I mean, I loved Ocarina of Time, but there was something about Majora's Mask justifying its existence. You've been told to ship another game in 2 years and reuse all of these assets. How do you make it worth playing? Well, you do something really narratively interesting. And so Link's Awakening for me kind of fits into that sort of space as well, of being like, it is a Zelda game, but it's just doing something a little bit more unusual. So yeah, big fan of that.
It's interesting because I played Link's Awakening, I think, last year, but I did play the original version of it. So for me, it was more, I didn't really zone in on that particular quality because I've experienced it already, and it was more, how have they adapted this to a more modern format? How does it play on the Switch? The aesthetic and style and what have you. I wonder then, given your, like you said, this focus on slightly off-piste Zelda, whether did you ever try Link Between Worlds, which is the one on the 3DS? Because that was one I loved, actually.
Yeah, and I think with Link Between Worlds, it was odd because it was almost like a sort of a pseudo sequel to A Link to the Past, in terms of the sense of, based in the same kind of world, but many years later. But then obviously, the whole gimmick with that one is Link turning himself into a painting form and kind of charging around walls and various things like that. But I think as well that had a load of interesting mechanics around things like renting the items that you need for different dungeons. So, you would have a kind of a different approach to getting the key item that moves you on to the next bit of the game. And ultimately, like that sense that you could kind of tackle things in a variety of orders. I think there was a point where I think after sort of the original NES game where it ended up going into sort of more of a kind of a linear approach. And then I think one of the big things with the series is it's kind of opened back out in towards you get to choose much more of what you do and in what order. But I think that's what's going to be interesting for Tears of the Kingdom as well, is going to be seeing to what extent does that sort of freedom continue versus to what extent do they decide to reintroduce things like traditional dungeons? Because I think that was one of the few things that a lot of people were saying about Breath of the Wild, outside of weapon degradation, was the dungeons themselves were perhaps, a little bit underwhelming, like interesting little puzzle boxes, but not what we'd come to sort of expect from a Zelda game. So it'll be interesting to see what happens there.
I saw you mentioned Oracle of Ages there, and obviously Oracle Season's been a two-packer. I understand, if I remember correctly, it was Capcom that designed those ones.
Yeah.
And it's interesting to see how another company takes the franchise and runs with it. Because obviously it's been traditionally been Nintendo. And Nintendo have farmed out other franchises to other companies. But how did you feel the Oracle games compared to the other Zelda games?
Well, it was always interesting because I felt, because Capcom also did some of the Game Boy Advance games as well. I have a feeling. I feel like Minish Cap might well have been. I'm not sure. Yeah, I need someone will need to fact check me on that. But I feel like one of the things about Season and Ages is, so I hadn't played the Game Boy version of Link's Awakening, but I think it's basically popped up onto the Virtual Console, and I think obviously they're using the same foundation, so it feels very light. I think that basically, having gone and sort of very briefly diddled around with it, they feel like they are sort of quite authentically Zelda-y games, which I think is a pretty solid achievement, considering the fact that obviously it's so sort of closely associated with how Nintendo handle it. And going back to Link's Awakening, there is no Zelda, there is no Ganondorf. It's an entirely different world and construction, and I think that's what makes it quite interesting.
I never knew Capcom made Zelda games. That's amazing.
Confirmed Minish Cap was also Capcom. I quickly looked it up there.
There we go.
There you go. I've never played any of the Capcom ones, funnily enough. Those are like the Game Boy Advance Zelda games are like my notable gap in my Zelda experience. So I think they're coming to the Nintendo Switch Online, I think, as well, as part of the new Game Boy emulation.
Yeah, I think so. I think realistically, I think that they're coming along. I was just thinking about the only time that deviation from the formula didn't really work for me, and that was Spirit Tracks, where I think the idea of riding a train around the landscape was less fun in reality. It was one of those things that, the inner train spotter was, excited by the possibility of being basically like, it's Link driving a train. This is great. And then you were like, oh yeah, no, there's a reason why trains aren't usually used for travel mechanics. It's because they're not great for exploring. You are restricted for some reason, but yes. So I think it is interesting to see how, if you do get a chance to play any of the Capcom games, they're sort of quite faithful while also being maybe sort of a little bit sort of distinguished. I think, especially in terms of like having a bit of a different character to them, and I think maybe just a little bit more sort of like a little bit more character around the fringes. So it's well worth sort of exploring on that basis.
Yeah,
that reminds me of those like, what would your dream, like, pick a developer and give them a franchise, kind of Twitter prompts, Capcom to make a Zelda game. Like, it sounds like one of those.
Yeah, that's it. And
Particularly,
you don't have lots of door opening animations. That's the key thing. So
particularly around the early 2000s as well. Like Capcom, I think, were another one of their high points, I guess, in that era. Like, they were actually, one of the reasons I have always been a big fan of Capcom is because they were probably one of the most ardent third-party supporters of the Dreamcast. And there are so many fantastic games that released exclusively on that platform or later get ported over to like the PS2 or what have you. I have confirmed Legend of Zelda The Minish Cap is one of the games that's currently available on the Game Boy Advance emulator on Nintendo Switch Online. So if you do have that, go check it out. Oh, there we go. I'm excited because they're bringing Metroid Fusion to it if they haven't already, which I played a lot of Metroid Fusion. That was actually my first Metroid game that I really got into and was like, I get this now. I understand why people dig me. I couldn't get into Super Metroid, but Metroid Fusion, I loved that game. So good. So I wanted the segue across because I know George talked about this way back in his episode, but Mike has recently been playing Pentiment of late. How are we finding that?
It's fascinating. It's a really, really interesting game, and there's just a lot to. I think in the wake of Disco Elysium, lots of people are experiencing different types of narrative games and thinking about what they want from narrative-driven games, and lots of people that might not normally be playing them are suddenly more interested in them. Like, I think Pentiment was not like a high-budget game, but it's out on Game Pass, and lots of people have tried it that might not have normally. But I've just found so much to love about it, and I went in relatively knowing very little about it, which I think also helped. But it does some fascinating stuff, like its portrayal of just everyday life, or its portrayal of like Christianity in 15th century Germany, and how it just feels very authentic and real, and it's not caricatured and it's not tropey. There are people that blaspheme, and there are people that are super devout, and there are people that have doubts about their faith or aren't Christian at all, and talk to you about that. And just, the world just feels very rich in a very laid back way. I'm failing a lot. One of the funny things about playing the game is I'm trying to act in a way that I think is polite, but I don't know what is considered polite in 15th century Germany. So I keep like accidentally flirting with people's wives and things like that, because I don't know what I'm supposed to be doing or what I'm not supposed to be doing. But the game has a really good sense of humor in that regard, and it kind of knows that you're going to make mistakes, and it is one of those games where failure just kind of leads to fun scenarios. So yeah, I'm enjoying the heck out of it. I think I'm pretty sure it's on Game Pass. I'm playing it on Steam, but yeah, if you do get a chance to pick it up, it's really worth it. There's so many interesting things about it. Yeah.
Still in the backlog for me. George, you finished Pentiment, right?
Yeah, finished it, and exactly as Mike said, loved it for the reason that it was so human. It's the sense that every character in that game that you interact with, it really is a distinct, defined person, and the actions that they use and the decisions that you make and everything that goes into that world, it all results in very human outcomes. And sometimes those outcomes are really joyful, and sometimes they're very, very messy. And I think there really isn't another game that I can think of, aside from maybe like some of those moments in Disco Elysium, that really gets close to it. So yeah, I'm a massive Pentiment fan. I really will sort of go to bat for it at just about any moment. I think I think the other thing as well was just, and going back to the politeness, it just reminded me of my other favorite thing about it, which is it's one of the only games which essentially gives you a series of perks by making like decisions about what your background or your past is, and allows those perks to punish you, where you think, aha, okay, I can use my legal background here, and you use it, and someone goes, oh, I don't want a lawyer's answer here. This is useless. This isn't what we want. We're talking about religion here, not the law. And you're sitting there being like, when was the last time that a game gave me a perk and then was like, nope, actually, this is going to make your experience briefly worse. So yeah, I think the fact that it's willing to say that yes, those skills that you develop, they are useful, but actually the context in which you use them is as important as the actual skill itself. I think again, there aren't many games that do something as interesting as that.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I also really like its portrayal of history. Is it has this kind of Horrible Histories-esque vibe to it. Horrible Histories is like a book series in the UK. I don't know how widespread it is outside the UK. Probably not, I suspect. But it's aimed at kids, and it tries to keep the gruesome bits of history in there. But it doesn't do it in a kind of unnecessary way or kind of relishing in, oh, the past sucked, like some medieval hardcore games might. What it does is, it presents you with situations that it knows is going to make you uncomfortable as someone that lives in the year 2023, and it doesn't let you fix them because it's the 15th century. You can't fix them, but instead you can sort of sit there and talk to people about them and feel the unfortunate nature of these situations or the unhappiness. And I love that too. It's very honest about the fact that you're not going to come here and fix everything with your 21st century view of things. The best you can do is just be there for people. I love that about it.
Okay, I really need to play Pentiment, I think, before the next time we all get together, because that's...
I'm making a note right now.
Already, I think in George's episode, he'd already made like a very strong case for it, but now I'm really double convinced I need to get around to playing this. Speaking of, Anne, while you're writing that down, you wrote down that you've been very busy with Switch Sports recently, which I'm interested in this because of course, everybody in their auntie played Wii Sports. In fact, probably their auntie played it more than they did.
Yes.
But I've been sorely tempted to pick this up.
It's an interesting game. So I was not planning to get it, I will admit, but it was given to me as a gift, and so I thought, why not? Let's give it a shot. And Nintendo does some things very well, and I feel like the sports franchises, I guess it's only one franchise, it does fairly well. The thing I like about it is that it's something that I can play with my partner, and we're also online at the same time. So it's, us versus randos basically. But we also, some of the sports we're playing cooperatively, some we're playing competitively. And there's a nice choice of sports. They just released in December, they released the golf. And before that, we had just been about the bowling. But the golf game adds quite a bit to it. There's a lot more choices and ways to actually use some skill as opposed to feeling like you're just wildly flinging your arms around, which is how I play tennis, apparently. And so with the golf, you're aiming, you're taking the wind into account, you're looking at, you actually pay attention to the green. And I don't play golf. Now, when I go past a driving range, I'm like, oh, that's that thing that I would do if I had any interest in playing this in real life. There are, of course, issues, because there always are. The thing that I get most frustrated. I'm so frustrated I can't even say the word. The thing I get most frustrated about is the controllers. And I'm not sure if it's because, I live somewhere where there's quite a few people around me, and you get on the Wi-Fi and there's 50 Wi-Fis around us that you can connect to, but the controllers are really just not always super accurate. And so you spend all this time like lining up your shot and get it all perfect, and then you can practice your shots and everything, and then it just suddenly goes crazy and you slice even though you never had. I don't know. It's, in some ways, though, it gives you something to, like, if you aren't good, you can blame the controller. And you can feel like you're better than you thought it's like, it's not me, it's the controller. And then occasionally you'll make these amazing shots. And of course, they're probably just as random as the bad ones. But the beautiful thing is that if you do a really nice shot, it will give you an instant replay. And so it's like, ooh, it was good enough that we get this instant replay. And also the thing I love about the Switch, which took me a little bit to get used to, but they have a feature in which you can take screenshots, but you can also take video. It takes a video of the last 30 seconds. So as opposed to like, oh, I'm going to do something cool, let me take a video. It's like, oh shit, I just did something awesome. Well, now it's not captured. Well, you just hit the button and now you've got the last 30 seconds. So you get your replays and they're about 25 seconds long. So you just hit it and now you've got, that amazing hole-in-one that you absolutely were 100% the reason that you got that hole-in-one.
It wasn't the controller. It wasn't the controller. It was you.
It was definitely me. The other thing that I think that they do well is that, Nintendo has thought a lot about, obviously family friendly, but this is a multiplayer game. Like I said, there are people from all over the world that are playing with you, and they do a good job of making it so you can express yourself, but also not be an asshole. Am I allowed to say that? I'm going to say that.
We'll keep that in.
Just bleep that out and it'll be fine. So, you can't just type whatever you want. They've got a sticker system, which I'm pretty sure they've been using for a while. But as you play, you unlock different stickers. And so you can actually customize what 4 stickers you have available to you. You also can change your title and you unlock those. You can call yourself whatever you want, which people get fairly creative with. So you can see some, there are definitely people where I'm like, man, I wish I could report names, but I get it. But I don't know. There's just so many ways that you can still express yourself, even with these 4 stickers. And, I say 4 because that's what you have access to while you're playing a game. But, I've unlocked probably 60 stickers. And so I can customize it whenever I want. And the reason I think we still keep playing is that every week they release new cosmetics. And so it's not only what you wear, but you can get different bodies. So like you can be a panda bear or a skeleton or whatever. But they also release new equipment. And the equipment is also cosmetic. So like my volleyball is a disco ball. But like the golf clubs have different effects when you shoot the ball. And, when for the soccer, you get different effects when you get a goal. So I don't know. They've done a fairly good job. It's just, it would be nice if the controllers were maybe a little more exact.
Like it's nice that they've invested so much time in like you say, like all these additional cosmetics and what have you, because it enriches or rewards repeated engagement, which was always the
Yes.
like Wii Sports was never built, I think, with a long-term thing in mind. It was built as a series of mini games that they're like, oh, people will play this for like 4 hours and then they'll be happy with it. And then subsequently people were buying the console just to play this one game. And
Yeah.
so yeah, it's kind of cool that they thought about that.
My understanding is it was just kind of a tech demo. And then people really enjoyed it. And they're like, well, shit, I guess we need to do more with this. And I wish they would do more with the Switch Sports version. But I don't know. I enjoy it way more than I thought I would. So
So it's quite interesting to see with Nintendo, and obviously they brought the motion controls in originally with the Wii, and then they put the Motion Plus, I think it was called, attachment. You plugged it in to make it more accurate. And now we have the motion control in the Joy-Cons. But at the cost that they do them, they're never going to be super accurate. And without camera tracking, they're never going to be as good as the VR units. So obviously there's a trade-off of accuracy and cost. And
convenience.
Most games, yeah, exactly. It's set up and it's easy to use them. But most games have to have this sort of fuzzy, I guess almost they have to work out what you're doing. If you play the dance games with the Joy-Con, it's completely feels almost random sometimes whether you get an excellent or not. But without having good controllers that cost way more, there's never going to be some the fidelity that you want from them.
Yeah, no, that's true. And for the most part, Nintendo does a fairly good job of they use that fuzziness often to your advantage, which I appreciate because it's not meant to be this hardcore game. And, when we were bowling, we actually found that you could just bowl sitting down. With golf, I find it a lot easier to stand up, but and I have tried golfing laying down. It doesn't work. You just swing in your arms. Why do I have to stand up for this? Anyway, it's been a long day. Sometimes I don't want to stand up.
I appreciate the scientific process there that you're like, hang on, what if?
Absolutely. When you study interfaces, of course you have to edge test everything. So the thing that I think that they could use some refinement on is actually they've got all these things for when you twist your wrist. So like when you're bowling, you can actually, do a spin on your ball. When you're golfing, you can slice. And that's the part where it really, I think, is maybe it's very hard to do it on purpose, and it happens accidentally more than it feels good, I think is really the problem. And also, if it was just consistent, that would be fine.
I think as someone who's made a fair few games with alternate controllers that deal with motion, it's something that you have to err on the side of making you feeling good rather than being accurate, I guess. But
yeah,
when
definitely.
accuracy is the important part, it's like opposing forces there.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And like I said, the accuracy is maybe not even the problem. It's just the lack of consistency that is really where it starts not feeling good.
Yeah.
Did you play the soccer mode?
Of course I've played the soccer mode. Oh, you mean where I put it actually on my leg? No.
No. Okay. I was curious because they added that, didn't they?
Yeah, they did. And I'm like, you know what I don't want to do in my small room?
With two cats and a dog kicking around as well.
Exactly. I can swing my arms and I don't hit anything, but kicking might be a problem. Also, speaking of dog, you can edit this part out. I'll be right back.
No, that's in.
Okay.
That's staying in.
That's staying in. It's our honorary sixth member. Yeah, so it's funny. I was scurrying through the news this week on account of, I was like, oh, what's an interesting talking point? And then two things that came up in our one-to-one with George in our first episode have reared their ugly head once again. I guess the ever ongoing Microsoft Activision acquisition. I remember us talking about this back in December when we recorded together, and we were like, yeah, there are going to be some gripes, but it's going to be a done deal. But it seems like there's been twists and turns, and now we've got, was it the FTC has sued Microsoft? The CMA is now suggesting that Microsoft divest Call of Duty from the rest of their enterprise. There's a lot going on. George, what's your take?
There is indeed our government affairs correspondent George Osborne here. No, I mean, so if you're listening to this in April, which you might well be doing so because this will be coming out after GDC, things might have moved on from here. So this is as time of recording. So sitting here towards the beginning of March, and as Tommy was saying, there were ongoing processes looking at it before Christmas. And then the biggest things that have changed is that the three big regulators that matter in terms of global regulation, so the FTC in the US, the European Commission in the EU, and the Competition and Market Authority in the UK. As we talked about a bit on the last episode, they've all been caught a bit flat-footed by big tech, making lots of acquisitions and kind of getting themselves to a position where they're quite dominant in the market. So there's been pressure on them to be a bit more interventionist, and as a result of that, Microsoft attempting to buy a major video games business for 69 billion has attracted their attention, and the result of that is that essentially all three of them are now having sort of a very close look at this deal for whether or not it's actually going to go ahead. So now the arguments against this deal proceeding, which are pretty consistent across all of the territories, are that essentially they're concerns about Microsoft exerting their influence generally over the market, because in terms of actual sort of cash size of the business, they're much, much bigger than practically everyone else operating in the game sector. But specifically that by buying, especially the Activision and Blizzard parts of the business, that they would use Call of Duty as a way to essentially restrict access to content. So if it was only available for sort of Xbox and Microsoft platforms, as a way of asserting dominance over the market and reducing access for people who play games to content at a reasonable price. And then at the same time, there's been questions about cloud services and about whether or not this will essentially lead to some sort of monopoly, because Microsoft not only obviously have things like Game Pass, which have cloud service elements to it, but they also have the infrastructure to build and support it. Now, on Microsoft's side, what they've argued back is that they've said, well, we've not got any plans to do anything like that with Call of Duty in terms of exclusivity, because it doesn't make any sense, because as they probably actually fairly and rightly say, the modern multiplayer game is cross-platform. It needs as big a user base as possible. So restricting access to it is probably a bad idea for them. Their other argument as well is that Sony is actually the clear market leader, especially in places like the EU. So the concerns about them suddenly going and knocking everyone else out of the market is a bit overblown. But their other thing is about saying that they're actually just willing to work with regulators to go and deal with concerns. So what's happened then as a result of all of this is regulators have been looking at this, and they've said that they're concerned, and there's essentially two things that regulators can decide to do in regards to this in terms of changing the deal to allow it to go through. So one of those things is called behavioral changes. So that's about saying this deal can go through, but your business has to agree to do certain things. So you have to take certain actions and make agreements about the way you're going to behave to be able to make this happen. Then there are structural things where they say, actually, we want you to take a bit of your business and maybe do something like sell it on. So those are the two things they can do to allow it to proceed. But then there is the additional thing they can do, which is decide to block it. And that is obviously the big thing that Microsoft does not want to happen, because if any of these big three basically block it, it probably kills the deal outright. So where do we stand? So the three things are, so the FTC, as Tommy's mentioned, they are suing to try and block this deal. Now, most people are not expecting this to succeed. I think the legal case that the FTC is pursuing, I think most people who are more familiar with law in America than I am, suggest that they do not have the grounds to make those kinds of arguments. But what they're trying to do is pressure Microsoft into concessions. So that is the kind of thing that they're looking towards, and they may well withdraw the case basically from happening if they get some of those concessions. You then go over to EU, where things are going probably a bit better for Microsoft. There was a notification of concerns about the deal, which happened earlier this year. Microsoft then went to a behind closed doors hearing with a number of other games companies to go and talk to EU regulators. And as well as talking to them, they announced some licensing deals with Nintendo and Nvidia to essentially demonstrate that this is definitely going to remain on other platforms for about 10 years, and say that they're offering Sony the same. That's quite significant, because they're essentially saying we're willing to make sure that Call of Duty is not exclusive for probably 2 console cycles. And if in competition terms, that's probably enough for someone to say, well, your business should be able to adapt over the course of a decade's worth of planning. So the EU looks increasingly likely that it's going to approve it, with the update sort of towards the end of February, suggesting that sources behind closed doors were saying they were going to approve it with those licensing deals, but also with some conditions about how the new merged company was going to behave. So their last major problem is essentially the UK and the CMA, because they found provisionally that it could impact players and it could harm competition. Very similar kinds of arguments, but the key thing is that the CMA looked at structural and behavioral recommendations, and they said they felt structural was the way to go. So what that meant was either splitting Call of Duty out, splitting Activision out, or splitting Activision Blizzard out of the business. Now, it's not 100% that they're going to go for a structural remedy. Microsoft is still saying that they believe that they can convince them with behavioral stuff based on the fact that the commission actually went for the deal in terms of Nintendo or Nvidia, or appears to have gone for it. But the key thing is that if the CMA goes through with this and mandates a structural change to the deal, essentially, due to the various ways that these different authorities operate, the CMA, it is very hard to appeal a mandated decision from the CMA unless you can demonstrate they've done something wrong procedurally. So what that means is that if they mandate the structural side of things, the deal would not be allowed to go through in the UK without one of those things happening. And Microsoft would probably not want to do that on the basis that they don't want to split anything out. So what that means is that by the end of April, probably this is not necessarily going to be fully wrapped up, but we're going to know probably the answer to it, because the EU set itself a deadline of the 25th of April to report on this. The CMA, not at all coincidentally, put on the 26th of April that they were going to do it as well. It's almost as if basically what's been happening is we've been engaged in a game of regulated chicken, where all of them have said, well, we all want to intervene on this, but also kind of none of us want to quite go first on this. You know, we want to see what everyone else is saying. So, you know, you've got those two in April, and then the FTC notionally, you know, things are ongoing, but August looks to be sort of more of the key date there. But they will likely change what they're doing if the Commission and the CMA both decide to wave the deal through with say, behavioural changes. So that, Tommy, is basically where we're at with this. By the time that this episode comes out, there is a reasonable chance that one or two of those things may have already happened. If they have, what a glorious or terrifying future we live in, depending upon your mad console affiliation. But generally speaking, that's pretty much what's been going on there. I would just say, having felt more confident about it before Christmas, who knows what's going to happen. There you go.
I have a question for you, George.
Yes.
So I know that they're looking at this primarily from, or at least it sounds like they're looking at it primarily from a financial standpoint. When they're doing these sorts of legislature or regulations or whatever this is falls under, do they have people there that actually are more familiar with the game side of things? You know, because I'm sure there is a lot of nuance that is lost when you just look at financials.
It's a really good question. And the answer is yes, they do, but it can be to kind of differing degrees. So I think when you're kind of looking across, as I understand it, in terms of the various policy circles, the CMA, for example, has quite a good reputation for having people who understand technology, which includes obviously the game side of things. I mean, the Commission does as well, but I think especially the CMA has kind of established a reputation around, you know, having expertise in there. And they have that expertise in there because they need to check what people are saying. So, you know, for example, one of the things about that closed door hearing that they had in the European Commission, from what I heard, one of the big things that they were checking was PlayStation's argument and Sony's argument that this would kind of potentially really sort of impact the traditional console model and impact their market leadership, because Sony had been talking about that around the world quite extensively, but actually, you know, there have been discussions about whether or not that had been tested enough. And so you need to have some people who've got that kind of expertise in house. And so what they will do is they will analyze evidence, they will analyze submissions. You know, the CMA and the Commission both asked for evidence from games businesses and, well, frankly, from wider organizations too, to help guide them. But they also make sure they have some subject matter experts to be able to say, okay, you know, I actually know this market pretty well, and I think maybe they're right, maybe they're wrong. But you get that sort of sense of building in some expertise to make sure that that is not just looking through the lens of a balance sheet and making a decision based on that.
That's somewhat reassuring.
Yes. And I would say as well, I think generally speaking, government is getting better at understanding games because you have more people in government who play games. And, you know, whether or not that is specialists or just people who've played games and maybe look at someone talking about it and read a policy paper and go, that doesn't really sound like a games issue to me, or that sounds a little bit far-fetched. You know, you have more people there, so there is that general side of things. But yeah, this is essentially probably I think Chris Dring of GI Biz described that hearing at the European Commission as the Super Bowl for the business news nerds who are interested in video games. So, you know, it's a biggie, and we'll see what happens.
And with the rumblings that the EU looks set to approve with behavioural changes, like you said, there's a kind of element of chicken here. Do you feel like if one of them goes ahead and approves it with just behavioural changes, do you think that then subsequently results in the CMA and the FTC like backing down because they want to align on that, or just like is there actually a chance that one of them approving it then subsequently results in them all approving it in a very similar fashion?
I think there is a chance of that. there is still also a chance that someone within the organization goes in the other direction and goes, this is a bit of a hero moment for us. We can actually be the ones who make the stand here, which I know sounds a strange thing to say when this is meant to be a dispassionate look at competition law. But again, it goes back to that sense of, if you're thinking about what big tech is, Microsoft is probably like the nicest bit of big tech, but it is nevertheless part of big tech. And so there are a lot of people who I think quite rightly have looked at the influence of big tech over tech policy, society in general, and gone, wings may need to be clipped somewhere. And there is a reasonable argument here around competition concerns that would allow someone to choose to do that if they wanted to. But there is that flip side saying, well, I mean, the UK being the sort of the key example here, which is like, on the one hand, rejecting it could be a good way of sort of showing we're the UK, we're doing our own thing. But then on the other hand, one of the consistent concerns for tech businesses is around this sense of we're now too distant from what's going on in Europe. And if we're too distant, that actually disadvantages us. So, the answer is could go both ways, but it is not necessarily unsurprising if one of them goes for behavioural recommendations, if the rest of them just back down.
See, the Tories have got to be careful as well, because then they might lose the Call of Duty vote, and they've already got a tough election up ahead of them.
Well, exactly. But yes, it's also just, in terms of regulators, like jostling for position and being like, we are the most important regulator in the world. We're the backstop. There is that sense that, a regulator could see itself in that kind of light. And I think the FTC has had a bit of a track record for trying to be like that for the last few years. But yes, it remains a can of worms that has been opened and poured all over the table.
Lovely stuff. Lovely stuff. George, I'm conscious we're going to have to love you and leave you at this point. You've got other places to be. But thank you so much for being here with us. And also thank you so much for delivering what I thought was a fairly good summation of the situation. I could have saved myself a lot of time reading gamesindustry.biz over the last couple of weeks if I just waited for this. But no, thank you so much. And we'll hopefully see you again very soon. I'll hopefully try and
thank you very much for having me along. And thank you for getting me out before we talked about loot boxes. That's a relief, isn't it? There we go.
Next up, let's talk
about loot boxes. But anyway, goodbye for now. And thanks very much for having me along.
Bye, George.
See you later, sir. Mike, do you want to take a story? Take a story. Take any story you like.
Do I? I don't know. I mean, I don't know if we want to go super in depth with it. I guess I'll pick up about some of the moves around AI legislation. So something fairly significant, maybe this year, this week, is that Paizo, who are the designers of the Pathfinder tabletop RPG system, said that they're not going to use AI art in their campaign books and related things that they sell. Now, this is coming off the back of Wired making a similar policy, saying that they wouldn't use AI generated articles or stock photography. It's kind of complicated. So on the one hand, some people saw this as a good move. Lots of artists were worried about them being put out of work. And one of the interesting things with tabletop role-playing games and fantasy style is that that's a style that has been very popular with people using these text-to-image AI systems. It is a bit more complicated here because Paizo apparently has a reputation for not paying their artists very well. So it's one thing to say that they're going to keep using human artists, but of course it's not just enough to keep them employed on a terrible wage. That said, I think it's interesting that these companies are beginning to see this as something that they can get a PR win out of posting. I think that's an interesting development. Now, I know for a fact that there are a lot of indie studios, even some maybe what we might call AA game studios, using AI image generators as like concept art systems right now and things like that. And I also know that there are a lot of artists working inside game studios who are worried about the proliferation of AI art, and worried that parts of their job that they like or that they think gives them value, you know, that where they can make a contribution, they're worried that those parts of their job might disappear. And we're still a ways off kind of game studios making big statements. I imagine GDC this month will have a lot of talks on this topic. Yeah, it's the beginning of an interesting time. I think we're going to see more of these declarations probably in the coming weeks and months. No one really knows where it's going to end up. These companies might regret posting these policies. They might, they might feel they have to backtrack on them in a year's time. But for now, that's where we are.
I thought it was interesting. I read the statement that Paizo had put on their blog, and one of the lines here was to quote, Paizo will add new language to its creative contracts that will stipulate that all work submitted to us for publication be created by a human. We will further add guidance to our Pathfinder and Starfinder Infinite Program FAQs, clarifying that AI generated content is not permitted on either community content marketplace. The first thought that came to my head was, how far down at what point is something still considered created by a human? At what point?
That's the problem. So the thing that I always find interesting about, these companies that have gone, no AI art, is that, of course, we've been using AI art for decades. It's often called Photoshop, and
right?
It's used all over the place, right? So, I'm old enough that I remember when things first came, when Photoshop first started gaining traction, there was a lot of people who were like, oh, no Photoshopped images. And now it's just a given that things will be Photoshopped. Like, we don't want your unphotoshopped images because they're going to be worse. I'm sure that's not true everywhere, caveat, but I have a feeling that that's kind of where this will end up going, because AI, things are always getting better, but there's still things that, of course, it doesn't do well. And as people gain literacy in AI art, you're going to be able to tell when things have been created by by one of these programs. And it's just like, now it's a lot easier to tell when something has been photoshopped. Obviously, there are people who are much better at it. But again, that's a human skill. It's going to be the same with these. That's my feel. That's my hot take. And you can at me, but I'm never really on Twitter, so I won't
All
notice.
about hot takes. But yeah, sorry, mate, go ahead.
The quote that you pulled out. So there's kind of two sides to this, right? There's the side that Anne mentioned about the kind of cultural acceptance. The quote that you pulled out, Tommy, though, is also interesting, because the community content marketplace, I think that speaks also to these companies not really being sure what way the wind is going to blow, legally speaking. So there are companies that are currently being sued about whether GitHub Copilot has just wholesale stolen code off people. And if Paizo's taken a cut of some AI generated art, and then it turns out, no, this was actually not legal, they could be opening themselves up for all sorts of problems. So I think the marketplace line is particularly interesting, because I think it does speak to the fact that it's really legally unclear what the status of any of these things are right now.
Right. Now, to be clear, I do want to, oh, sorry, go ahead, Quang.
It kind of goes back to what George was saying, and how legislation is always behind tech. Mm-hmm. Tech's moving forward so quickly that the legislation has no idea what's going on, and so we have to hedge our bets and see which way that will go. And as you say, whether it'll be getting sued or not, it's who knows.
Yeah. The first time I saw something created, I think with Midjourney, my very first thought was, oh, well, IP law is going to be changing. And to be clear, I do think that using people's artwork without their consent, I think that is problematic. And so for those of you who are currently sending me hate tweets, I did want to make that clear.
Sure, I'll delete it. Sorry, Anne.
Okay, thank you. I won't block you then.
This is something I'm slowly working on over on my YouTube side. I'm actually working on a long form video on exactly this topic. But one of the things I'm really keen to do is get the voice of the community a little bit more and get their opinion on it. Because we are in this space of tools that can facilitate and enable so much that are secretly AI and have been AI for a long time and you just didn't know it, versus this more disruptive phase that we're going into, which is quite often the same as a lot of other research we see where, and I say this with full respect to all the dude tech bros that I already know, but a bunch of dude tech bros come up with some technology and go, we're going to renovate, we're going to completely, revolutionize this space. And we're going, no, you're fucking not, because you don't really know what you're talking about. And then we end up going through this very gradual process of, then these ideas begin to percolate in a more meaningful, practical, pragmatic way. Nowadays, because it's all coming from these big corporations, the dude bro bellowing is a little louder and it's a little bit inescapable. How many people have been talking about ChatGPT for the last month? So those things are becoming louder and then it muddies the conversation. But yeah, I think both of you are right in the sense that we have an issue with the technology and how you define the tech, and then subsequently also these legal ramifications of, we maybe don't want to use AI generated content from the community because we're going to get ourselves in a tremendous amount of hot water right now. Ooh.
Yeah. And I think that, as these things become more mainstream, we're seeing a lot of, I feel like I'm seeing this already, where a lot of people, when they first come into AI art, they tend to generate stuff that looks kind of the same. It's gotten to the point where it's like, oh, I can tell that's made with Midjourney. I can tell that's made with Stable Diffusion.
Is that like the basic of generative art?
Yeah, basically. So I'm sorry, but it's true. It's like, first time people use Photoshop, there's certain things that people generally do. And so I think when that, at some point, we're going to just kind of hit some critical mass of that stuff, and it's just not interesting. And we're already seeing that. Like, it used to be people were making money off NFTs of AI, some of this AI art, but now you have to stand out from that. And so you're getting the people who are putting in the extra work, they're making it theirs, they're finding their own style. And so it's already kind of, I feel like, I don't know, I don't want to say self-regulating, but it's getting to the point where, it's going to require that human effort again to make it even stand out and people to notice. And so, we're going to get to some stasis. Granted, it changes so fast that is currently moving a little bit faster, staying just ahead. But
I think we have this thing where, as tools come along, not just AI tools, but all tools, it allows more and more people to do things. Obviously, we have things like Unity and Unreal making it easier to make games. So more people making games, but then we're getting more rubbish games, asset flips and things like that. And I say, if you want to stand out, you have to put the extra work in. You have to do more than the tool allows you to do easily. So you have to you have to stand out, and will come to the point with AI generated art that unless you do something with it and take it to the next step, it's just the same old.
Right.
Like this kind of like as a generative artist, it's like another sub-discipline within games. Oh, I'm a generative artist, but I create generative art for specific purposes within context of a production pipeline, which I think that's probably the end goal, because it's then you're supporting a person to be creative rather than trying to replace the person in being creative.
Exactly.
That's where we need to go.
Well, and I think it's the way that it will naturally go, because the thing I've found doing AI-based tools for so long is that people don't want the AI tools that do the fun part for them. They want the AI tools that do the boring part. And so, I don't remember if I mentioned this or not in our episode, but that's why SpeedTree is used everywhere. Every game you've probably ever played with trees in it. And I think that's where AI art will go, is that we're going to start using it to do the boring parts, but the more interesting things are going to continue being, really human-led and human-made. So if you need to create 100 NPCs, you might use AI art to kind of get you started and then finish it up. But for the main character, I don't know that you'd want to use AI art.
Well, moving into another story, particularly around hot technology topics, and staying ahead of the discourse. Dr. Disrespect, he's not a PhD. Let's just get it out the way. Three of us.
Finally, someone says it.
Somebody says it. We've got a lot of PhDs in this call. Dr. Disrespect is not. Herschel Beam. I'm going to refer to his actual name for the rest of this news story. Herschel Beam, who is currently developing PvP shooter Dead Drop. He is, of course, a very famous Twitch streamer. Or is he even on Twitch anymore? I don't know. He was. But ex-game designer who then became famous for being a bit of a professional asshat, who then ended up going into game development, has decided to double down by advocating for NFT loot. At a point where I thought NFTs were dead, at a point where I thought we'd moved on from this conversation, the quote from the headline of this story was "NFTs aren't dead yet. Dr. Disrespect is excited. Herschel is excited for 100,000 blockchain items, $100,000 blockchain items. So essentially, the idea that you play like Call of Duty, the DMZ or Escape from Tarkov style gameplay, where you're going in to get a bunch of items, get a bunch of loot, and come out with it. But the idea is that these are NFTs, and so you're gonna it's advocating for this idea of loot that you extract from the game that is then a digital collectible and it has value. So Mr. Disrespect has been a very strong advocate of this at a time where I think the most sensible of people have moved on from this. I thought NFTs were dead. I didn't think we were still doing this anymore.
As far as I understand it, if you're in the NFT sphere, to make money in NFTs, you have to convince other people that they're worth something. So you have to double down. You have to get other people on board so you can make money.
Mr. Quang, that sounds like a grift.
Well, I believe it's kind of disc-shaped. Shape, for those who can't see us.
For our audio listeners.
Like a triangle shape, yes.
Yeah, kind of triangle-ish. I believe that's the kind of shape that the grift is.
Indeed.
It is weird because I thought it had fully died out as well. Like, I don't know who this is appealing to. Well, it's appealing to investors, presumably. I mean, I don't know. Like, obviously NFTs are still being used elsewhere. The movement hasn't like died completely, I don't think, but like in games it felt that there was very strong pushback against it, also because it's not a very interesting idea, like this thing he's proposing. I mean, I think we're all old enough to remember the stories from EVE Online, for example, when very valuable things were destroyed. It didn't require any complex technology, it just required a community and time, and if anything, that was a better way of doing it because it had a lot more meaning associated with it.
Like, I always find it funny when people talk about particularly the idea of, oh, well, this could be a really valuable item because then it could appear in another game. And so two things that come up. One, I don't know if I'm that invested in a game that I really want that really bad skin that I got in that version of that shooter 7 years ago to then use in another shooter 7 years later. I'm kind of past that point. Secondly, like, Steam's been doing this for like over a decade with the marketplace. Like everything every time I hear NFT advocacy of NFTs around, oh, you can transfer between games, I'm like, I give you the Steam marketplace. Look, I can buy a hat that came out in Team Fortress 2 in 2011 for 3 pence. It was $3,000 8 years ago, and it's 3 pence now, but I can buy it and put it on my hat and my character, and that's great. And what are you offering that is more than that? But what if you own the hat? I'm like, I do own the hat. I've got it. I bought it off the Steam marketplace. I don't get it. I don't get it. And it also, I saw a comment when I read this story, which made me laugh really hard. Was like, I've never seen a game be declared dead before we've even seen a screenshot of it.
Yeah.
Yeah. I was going to say that I think the market will make it clear their feelings about this.
Even
It's
Sorry,
not like
Mike,
it's
go ahead.
easy to make a PvP shooter as is today. Like, it's such a competitive market. Like, why would you, make it even harder for yourself by doing this? I don't know.
Yeah.
Because I guess people will believe that they can make money in it some way. If people believe they can make money, then they'll jump on board. You get more money, they get more money. Everybody gets more money. Sounds great, doesn't it?
Yeah, that does sound great, actually, Quang. When you put it that way, everyone gets more money. Like, I love that idea.
That's great. It's great when money's not a zero-sum game.
Capitalism. Even like what was it? There was Ubisoft was doing NFTs, and that's quietly disappeared. They released a pair of pants and like a hat or something in Ghost Re. They also released it. You could tell that they weren't really committed to it because they also released it on like the one game that they've released in recent memory that nobody played or liked, which was Ghost Recon. Oh, what was it? What's that one called? It's not Wildlands. Wildlands was good. Oh, I'm gonna have this.
I don't know, but I was wondering, is it pants as a hat?
No,
Well,
but
I was
that would have been a
wondering-
much better idea. Ghost Recon Breakpoint, that was it. Sorry.
Is it US pants or UK pants? That's my question.
I think I said that in the context of US pants.
Okay.
Although I think it would have been better if it was UK pants.
UK
As a hat.
pants, always better.
Or just-
UK pants as a hat. There's the name of the episode.
Well, I was going to say
I think
that's
Square
probably...
Enix are still quite deep into it.
Oh yeah. Square Enix came
Yeah.
out recently and they're like, "Yep, NFTs, we're all about it." Meanwhile, they can't seem to keep a live service game open for longer than 12 minutes before they shut it down. I think Square Enix have now shut down more games this year than they plan to sell this year. Like, or they've even
Damn,
announced.
with the hot takes.
As long
Well,
as they
they
keep
did,
Final
like-
Fantasy 14 going, it's fine. They can do whatever they want.
It's been interesting watching them kind of divulge all the other parts of their portfolio because it's like, apart from Final Fantasy, we don't really know what we're doing, so we're going to sell everything else off. Tomb Raider, we don't need it. Crystal Dynamics, yeah, we'll get rid of them. Eidos, yeah, sure, we don't need that. Give it over to the sell it off elsewhere, but we really need Final Fantasy 14, 15, and 16 to fuel our Chocobo GP game that we're shutting down. Anyway. Hot take. Square Enix has been bad at business for about a dozen years, which is not news to anyone. I always love this. If you ever, I'm on the verge of going on a rant, but I'm going to stop myself. But if you ever look at any of their like end of year fiscal or like quarterly fiscal reports, and it's like a Western game, they go, "We expected this to make more money than God. It didn't. Therefore, it has went below expectations." How many copies of that Tomb Raider game? We sold 6 million. What was your estimate? 20. Like, who were you going to get it to? Like, who did you expect was going to buy this? Like, every person in the UK, it's like, "Oh yeah, Lara Croft's British. We're all going to go out and buy a copy of Tomb Raider, one in a household." Like, they're mad. They're mad. Anyway, moving on. We did have another story about loot boxes, which George isn't with us at the moment. But funnily enough, a big part of our story, our conversation with George, was about the difficulty in defining whether or not a loot box is considered gambling and therefore falls under gambling regulations, and also particularly across the EU, they've been softening on this. But Austria just declared FIFA Ultimate Team is gambling. Which, a quote from Video Games Chronicle, according to the court, due to the contents of FIFA's loot boxes having the possibility of being worth more or less monetarily than the value of the pack itself, thus theoretically offering a financial benefit to those lucky enough to receive a valuable item, they therefore violate the Austrian Gaming Act. Which, it's a fair argument.
Agreed.
There we go. We side with the Austrian Gaming Act. With the side with the Austrian Gaming Act. Yeah, I'm still wondering whether they're even going to continue with FIFA Ultimate Team in its current form, because FIFA changes this year as well. We're getting. I was going to say, do you guys know about this? So FIFA and EA have fell out. So they're no longer. FIFA 23 was the last FIFA.
Yeah.
This year it's called.
That's big news, huge news.
How? Yeah.
It's called
yeah,
something
that's-
weird now, right? It's like called football or something.
I think it's like EA Sports FC 24. I think is what it's called. Yeah, EA Sports FC. That's what they're going to call the new one. But also FIFA apparently have hired a studio to now go and make a FIFA game because they're going to miss out on their money otherwise. But
Well, they should talk to Microsoft, Activision, Blizzard. I hear that's the other game in town.
oh my god, Activision
I'm just trying to loop it around.
That would be hilarious. Like, you know, sort of Activision takes over making FIFA. It's got a battle pass in it now.
Oh god.
Now you can get, like, I don't know, rainbow boots for your player, or like they have a different custom emote for when they. You know what? I'm actually just inventing something that does actually sound pretty good now that I'm saying it out loud. Call me. We can make this work. But yeah, I think that's the last. Oh, dog. Sorry,
Dog.
for our audio listeners, that doesn't make any sense, but random dog just walked by. But yeah, I think that was our last story. The only other thing was I noticed Paradox had made a bunch of announcements this week. I don't know if there's any Crusader Kings players here or anyone big into Europa Universalis.
My friends are very excited about the Crusader Kings 3. They said the new DLC, Tours and Tournaments, I think it's called. They said that sounds like it's going to be really good. I think CK3's had a great launch. It's kept doing well. They seem to be very happy with all the stuff they're adding. And I'm excited for is it Harebrain's latest game as well? Like that sounds really exciting.
Was that
Lamplighters League?
Lamplighters League, yeah.
So they're finally getting some original IP. So we're going to see what they do with that.
What did they work on previously?
So they made the they've worked on Shadowrun, I believe, and they did what's the mech franchise that I'm blanking on now? They did a mech. There was a mech franchise, BattleTech. I'm just saying words.
That sounds
Tommy will
right.
edit this in. He'll deepfake my voice saying the correct name of the game.
Yeah,
it was a good game. But I'm excited for them to do something with their own kind of thing. They made some great games. So high hopes.
Yes, BattleTech confirmed.
Excellent.
There we go.
Fantastic.
I shout out to my friend Mike, who not yourself, Mike, but my other friend also called Mike. But shout out to you too, who has been nagging me for years to make a Crusader Kings AI in Games episode. I don't have anything to go on, but I know it's beloved. I'm actually excited. They also announced was it City Skylines 2 for 2023, which I didn't realize that the original City Skylines is now 8 years old.
Yeah,
and I'm excited for I've never got into City Skylines as much as I would like. It's a lot of fun, but it's never really hooked me as much as I want. I don't know what it is. It's something that I just can't stick with it for a long period. I think I struggle with trying to figure out how to sustain and maintain my cities. I get them to a certain size and then it just turns into a dystopia in about a fortnight. I think that's, maybe they can help me out. All right, tell you what, how about we take a quick break and then we'll wrap up because we've got some correspondence from our audience that we'll need to go through as well. How does that sound, kids?
Love it.
I say that I'm almost the youngest one here. All right. We'll be back in a second. Woohoo!
You missed our idea of NFTs and loot boxes, Tommy.
All right, well, we're going to come back right now. We'll just, this is us returning back to Branching Factory episode 5. Anne has got a wonderful idea for loot boxes and NFTs.
Loot boxes with NFTs.
Oh,
NFTs
sorry.
in loot boxes.
Oh, so it's an NFT box.
I mean, it's a loot box with which it contains NFTs.
Oh, sorry. What about if the loot box was the NFT?
Why not both? ¿Por qué no los dos?
A receipt
Let's
with
do it.
receipts. A receipt printer.
NFT loot box that has NFTs inside. Sounds great.
Yes. Perfect.
I'm sure we can make it work. reach out to us at branchingfactor@aiandgames.com with your requests for how to break this a reality. Also, if you've just got emails you want to send us, by all means, we'll also take them on board as well. How's that for a segue? I was quite pleased with that right there.
That was really good. This is going to be the episode where we get all of the hate mail.
I'm looking forward to it. So yes, once again, for your hate mail, branchingfactor@aiandgames.com. Unless, of course, you're one of our wonderful patrons, in which case then you can just reach out directly to us in the audience questions part
With
of the
your hate
Discord
mail.
server with your hate messages. We'll set up a little feed for you.
Your rage questions.
With your rage. Yes, please direct your rage to us at patreon.com/aiandgames. All right, so first of all, we have an email from Jean, who says, "Hello, Dr. Tommy," and of course, I'm assuming everybody else. "You invited questions for the podcast." I did. So the question is, in 2/5/10 years, when AI tooling is more ingrained in game dev, what will be those uniquely human qualities that will benefit/differentiate someone in the studio? My own take, being able to dream/ideate and design for a specific outcome. Kind regards, Jean. So this is kind of tying in a little bit to what we were just saying about, earlier in the episode about the integration of AI technology and like being a generative artist specialist within the studio. I don't know. And I feel like you're maybe more qualified than me to comment on this particular question.
Oh, good God. Yeah, no, it's a really good question. So I think, oh God, how do I word this? So I think there's going to be a number of things, obviously. I feel like good narrative is going to, we've got ChatGPT and it can nail most of the narrative tropes, but a lot of games that are pushing beyond those tropes, ChatGPT and other machine learning systems aren't going to be able to necessarily make those sorts of things because, it's working from what it knows. Whereas a lot of when you're pushing against the norms, you're doing a lot of flipping and subverting, and AI is just not super great at that yet. I'm not sure it will be. And then I think also basically anything experimental is often going to be, as humans, we are really good at pattern matching and thinking about things that are, looking at things that may not be similar on the, at first blush. That is a terrible term that I need to not ever use again. Anyway, at first glance, they look very disparate, but once you start looking into it more, you get to know it more, you start finding these similarities, and those leaps of logic and intuition are things that AI is just currently not good at, and I don't think it will be in 2, 5, 10 years. But we're gonna have some beautiful trees.
I like your comment about particularly around narrative and the notion of subverting narrative, because in order to do that, you're often, typically in a lot of games, even there, you're establishing tropes, you're establishing common concepts, and then you're creating this framework with such that you can then subvert it.
Right? Yeah, you have to know the norms to break it, and so part of the problem with ML is that, or machine learning, is that it doesn't actually know the things. It's just modeling. It's just pattern matching, basically. And so because it doesn't know those norms, it can't break them.
Yeah, absolutely. Sorry, Quang, go ahead.
But obviously in, 2, 5, 10 years, as John was asking, is that something they could learn? Because as humans, we pattern match as well. And if that's what AI is doing, at some point, does it learn to subvert and change 10 years down the line? Who knows? I think at the moment we're very much in this sort of uncanny valley sort of place where it looks good, but if you look at it, it just seems off, and we can detect that as humans. But in 10 years' time, who knows?
I mean, this is true.
Yeah,
but go ahead.
I was going to say, funnily enough, like a point that I now make to a lot of people who reach out, I've been chatting with people recently about ChatGPT and going, hey, can we use this in our company? And I'm going, no, you can, but I wouldn't advise it. And it's like, I think one of the big turning points is for these systems to become cognitive and reflective. So a lot, as we're saying, this is all pattern matching. And at the end of the day, things like ChatGPT are not cognitive systems. They don't understand what they write. They don't fact check what they write. I use this description, and I now use it everywhere else it comes up, that generative AI is fiction. It's just fiction that's inspired by reality. It's never guaranteed to align with it, though. So you can't guarantee anything. If I wouldn't trust a generative AI, generative text system. I wouldn't trust anything it says to me. But it can give me a nice, I think we were talking earlier about creating blueprints from which to build from. Like, oh, can you write me up something here that I can then use as a starting point for my own creativity?
Right.
I think that's a really useful point. But critically, I think for a lot of writing systems and that ilk, it needs to be able to understand the thing that it's making and why it is appropriate for the task that it has been given, or maybe it's inappropriate or appropriate for a context that it is being used. So if you're writing a certain type of character, maybe it's okay for it to use inappropriate terminology, to be a bit racist, because that is in the confines of the fiction and an aspect of that character. But in any other case, we would not ask for that to be the case, because that is just not how people behave. That is not how people perform. But we're asking it to embrace this element as part of a creative pursuit. Probably not the best example to pick that particular thing, but...
Well, you bring up a good point, though, Tommy, because a lot of, these systems are built on these large data sets, and those data sets, of course, shape what it can make. And so, some of the things that we look at in the academic side is that what's missing from those data sets and who is missing from those data sets. And so, it's very good. ChatGPT is very good at making the things that generally Caucasian males are, just that is the sort of thing that it's very good at making, because that's the data it's built on. But once you start looking at other cultures, it really starts breaking apart. And so that also, I think, is going to help things stand out, because that hasn't been fixed in the last, I don't know, however many years. And I don't think we're going to solve that problem in the next 10. So until, people start funding that sort of work. And so I think that is definitely one way that human touch will be able to stand out, is, I think, as you said, both in the kind of that factualness and being built on real experiences, as opposed to these sort of hodgepodge scrapbooked versions.
Yeah, funnily enough, I think it lacks truth.
Yeah.
That's it. It lacks truth of the authenticity of the author. I think that is, and it's a very short way to declare a much more nuanced thing. But that's how I'm selling it from here onwards.
I like it.
So again, it's with its uncanniness at the moment, and if it's learning from itself, it will just get more and more uncanny, because it's not, it doesn't understand that it's wrong. Very much in the same way, at the moment, the AI art has a problem with fingers, and it's always too many fingers, and it's learning
or too
humans
few,
need fingers. Yeah, too few. So it just learns from itself and adds more fingers or reduces more fingers, and it's just not learning good things. But it doesn't know that's right or wrong. It's just learning from its data sets, and if its data sets aren't wide enough or good enough, then you get this problem.
Yeah, it's using its data set to evaluate what it's making, and so whatever is missing from that data set, or whatever is biased in that data set, that's what it's going to produce.
Mike, have you got any thoughts on this? You've been very deep in
Oh no,
thought.
it's great listening to other people's perspectives. I think just one other thing I'd add is that in terms of like what will be important if you work in a studio, I think probably our ability to work with other people, especially people with different skill sets to ours, will become even more important because everyone will start, working probably in smaller teams, probably across different domains all at once, and so our ability to like communicate with each other and actually do the human parts of the job will probably become more important, I would guess, even if there are fewer jobs around maybe in some studios. The ones that remain will be very much about your human co-workers as much as your AI ones, I would guess.
Well,
Yeah,
I'll have lots of videos to make trying to explain all this, I guess. So that's me still in business.
I'm just not convinced that it's going to actually require fewer people. Yeah, I think it will let people go further. And as we go further, the expectations will rise. And so you'll just continue to need as many people. But I'm a little bit idealistic sometimes, so optimistic. Except when I read Twitter.
That's right. Don't forget, send us out your hot takes and your angry messages. Branching Factor at aiandgames.com.
Oh, my Lord.
I'm directing them away from you. It's okay. I'm just
Thank you. I appreciate it.
Inbox. So next email, our second email, we got from Scott from Minneapolis in Minnesota. It's nice. He actually told us where he's from. That's cute. Hey, Branching Factor. We're seeing more and more remakes come out on PC and consoles of late. While horror games seem to dominate with Resident Evil 2, 3, 4, Dead Space, and the upcoming Silent Hill 2, there's stuff like Final Fantasy 7 and even recent remasters like Metroid Prime that go out their way to rebuild the experience for modern platforms. Do you all have a particular franchise or individual title you'd like to see revisited to adopt more contemporary gaming conventions? Me personally, I'd like to see a return to some of the old Bullfrog games like Syndicate, Black and White, and Dungeon Keeper, but without the monetization this time. Thanks for reading, and I look forward to more podcasts. Scott. Yeah, Dungeon Keeper without the monetization.
I just think it's funny that more contemporary gaming conventions, but without the monetization. How does that work? Sorry. After just saying that I'm idealistic, and then I throw that out there.
I mean, you worked in AAA. The cynicism is hard to shake off.
It's true.
I think for me, it's probably Deus Ex. I felt very fortunate to get Human Revolution and Mankind Divided, which I liked very much, and I never thought I would see that done so well. But the franchise has gone to sleep again, so I'd love to see it come back, and I could see give Deus Ex to Arcane and ask them, like modern Arcane, to remake the original Deus Ex. I think that'd be a pretty kick-ass remaster.
As someone who makes games for older systems, I'm very much a fan of pixel art and stuff. But generally, with these remakes, the early 3D games, which look terrible and could do with a visual overhaul. But earlier we touched upon Link's Awakening, and obviously they took a 2D game and made it 3D, and it was a wonderful way of doing it. They had a wonderful tilt shift sort of viewpoint, so everything looks like a toy. And I think that's a possibility we can look at, making more 2 games but in 3D, because there's obviously a huge jump there. For me, pixel art is timeless, but we're having the younger generation now looking at pixel art and not necessarily understanding it as a style. They prefer the polygons because that's what they're used to. So if we can give them the gameplay from the old 2D games in a polygon style, then maybe that will help widen that audience there.
Yeah, funnily enough, looking at that list, a lot of them are PlayStation and PlayStation 2 era games. Which
I was going to say, like, I've hit an age now where, like, I don't need to worry about this question in a way, because I'm at the age now where everyone just wants to remake things from my childhood for my benefit. So, like, yeah, Final Fantasy 7 and Resident Evil 2, go for it. Like, I can just sit and wait. Like,
yeah, I was going to say that the thing I most wanted to be remade got remade a few years ago, which is Pokemon Snap. So, but the thing that hasn't been remade is, like, even Secret of Monkey Island got remade, but the older Sierra games, they would have to be rehauled pretty much, quite extensively, just because I don't think the things that they did would stand up to current norms. But those are the games that haven't been touched that I think might be interesting to remake.
Oh, you just got me thinking there about, I'm going to see if I can find it. So one of the things I did think was interesting about this question is I've played quite a few of these. So I've played the remake of Resident Evil 2 and 3, and I'm currently playing the remake of Dead Space. And I like that these are opportunities to take an existing game and did this work? Does this... Actually, one of the things that's interesting about the Dead Space remake is it is incredibly faithful. It feels like you're playing that game all over again. And which I think is a true testimony to the team at EA Motive who made it, that it feels like I'm playing the original Dead Space, having played the original as well. And it's been so nice to revisit that game with all these really subtle flourishes that come with it running on contemporary hardware and just improvements in overall game design that we've learned, oh, maybe we don't do things like this. Whereas Resident Evil 2 and 3 are completely different. Like, they are, in many respects, a remake, but in terms of, not just in terms of its graphics, in terms of its structure, its layout, everything about it is, oh yes, I'm replaying the story of Resident Evil 2, which is already a bit of a stretch. Like, the Resident Evil game narrative is, but it is a reimagining of that idea, and I really enjoyed that. I'm keen to play Final Fantasy VII Remake, actually, as someone who never played the original. I'm playing Final Fantasy 15 at the moment, but prior to that, the last one I played was 4, which ages me a little.
The remake of 7, I don't know if anyone else here has played it. It's interesting because it is very much a reflection on what it means to remake a game. They've changed the narrative slightly.
I heard,
part
yeah.
of that is, I mean, I won't spoil it, obviously, but the things they've done are fascinating. And I think it's like a unique case, at least as far as I can see, among quote unquote remakes, to actually think about what it means to do that. I really enjoyed it.
But yeah, I feel like with these remakes, it's worth being a bit more adventurous and trying push. Like, I'm interested to see if they do a remake of Dead Space 2 and 3, and they particularly 3, because Dead Space 3 is not a great game. Let's just throw it out there, because Dead Space 3 is an action game that is trying to pretend it's a survival horror game, and it didn't hold me. And it's also, funnily enough, per Scott's comment, laced with microtransactions. I'd be interested to see if they go back and revisit that and go, what parts of this we can rip out and what parts of it are these are the true like pillars of this game and worth keeping, and then how do they reshape it. But something Anne said about Sierra games made me think about Earth Siege, which was a mech simulation game from like 1996, back when Mech Warrior was also a kind of a big thing. Man, I'd like to see someone go back and do mech games again. And I know there's, what is it, Steel Battalion? There's another Steel Battalion coming out, which I think that's one layer of it. I'd like to see is kind of embracing this whole this whole kind of genre again. It feels like it just got too complicated for people like me who are just not smart enough. I need something somewhere in the middle.
You've got FromSoft's Armored Core, right?
Sorry, Armored Core. That's what I'm thinking of. I said Steel Battalion. I meant Armored Core. That was it. But yeah,
maybe it's something they could take the Titanfall franchise down. take Titanfall, make that into a bigger.
Oh, don't say Titanfall to me.
Said the activation phrase.
Yeah, this is it. I love
the
Titanfall.
podcast just added an extra hour to its running time. Tommy's gonna.
Hi, welcome to Branching Factor. Let me tell you now about why Titanfall 2 is the best game ever made. No, I think actually my original answer was going to be Burnout, but pre acquisition by Electronic Arts Burnout. So like Burnout Revenge. Like, they don't make racing games like that anymore. I'm not a fan of Burnout Paradise and all the other. And then subsequently they did Need for Speed Most Wanted, and I much preferred the kind of more focused linear experience of that. I'd like to see something like that again. There we go. That was a very long answer. Sorry, I took forever. Okay, jumping to the Discord. Bernard, one of our top tier patrons, said, "What's everyone's guilty pleasure game?" Mike, is it still Dota 2?
Yeah, it is, I'm afraid. I fixed my RSI problems, which means I can play it again.
Oh
and
no.
they've just made some updates to their kind of arcade, like simplified version of the game, which I like playing because the game's about 25 minutes and I don't need to think. And yeah, it's still good. For the record, I don't believe in guilty pleasures. I have no guilt about playing Dota 2, but yeah, it definitely fits the description.
Glad you fixed your RSI though. That's great.
Yeah, it's
Yeah,
been
that's
good.
awesome.
Yoga has been a major thing, I think. Yeah.
Make a triangle shape. Anyway.
Was triangle shape not going to be the episode title at this point? Quang, what about yourself, sir?
So I really hate clicker games on phones because they just have you in this cycle of clicking every day and trying to just get more stats and more numbers and stuff like that. But somehow I fell into playing X Hero on my iPhone, and I play that every day. And it's now I can't put it down each day because I've got to do my daily tasks and do my dailies and get the things. If I miss a day, then I'll get the rewards and stuff like that. And so as much as I hate them, I am now playing X Hero every day for half an hour to an hour or whatever. That's my guilty pleasure, unfortunately.
It sounds like a guilty chore.
Yeah.
Like I wanted to talk. So my guilty pleasure is also a mobile game. So I have played a shocking amount of Shining Nikki, which is a fashion RPG gacha game. Oh,
It sounds great.
gosh.
You were telling me about it. It sounds awesome.
I am Googling this now.
It has some of the most amazing clothing physics I have ever seen. Like, it's rendered in beautiful 3D, and I don't know, it's surprisingly well done. I guess it's not surprising given the amount of microtransactions that are in there. But yeah, I also do my dailies.
That's the thing. I've refused to put any money into X Hero,
Oh, here
so
we go.
I've got to grind a lot more. So if you're not putting money into it to get any, kitty.
There we
Okay.
go. For our video,
yeah,
for
so
our video listeners, there is no cats.
Yes, so because I know what sort of game it is, I know it's a clicker, and I'm very aware of what game it is. I refuse to put money into it, but I'm not putting it down, so I've got to grind. So I'm
Right.
now trapped in this game where I'm clicking every day to make sure I don't miss out on things.
Fair enough. I think I align with Mike's comment. There's no such thing as a guilty pleasure. It's just it's a game that you're maybe a little embarrassed about the first time someone asks you about it. I was going to say for many years it was like I kind of like hack and slash games, just mindless destruction games. So things like Earth Defense Force. I absolutely adore those games to the point I made an entire video about it with Rami Ismail, which you should go watch. It was hilarious. That's probably the most fun I've ever had making a video. And things like Hyrule Warriors on the Switch, which is Dynasty Warriors, but it's got a Zelda skin on it. And funnily enough, I don't like Dynasty Warriors. I've tried playing it and I go, this game's crap. And then they literally give me the exact same thing. And then it's like, now you're fighting moblins, but you're Link. I'm like, this is the best game ever. I'm aware of how shallow I am when it comes to, it's like, we've literally gave you an asset flip, a very expensive asset flip, but here it is. And I'm like, oh my God, this is so good. And it is. I think it's just, I enjoy when you've got 30 minutes to kill or you've had a long day and you just want to chip away at something in much the same way that you were saying there about getting if it's a clicker game or whatever, just getting the numbers to go up. Like here, it's just a number of ants destroyed by my rocket launcher is going up. But yeah, those are probably it. Still to this day, I've stuck with Earth Defense Force since the third one, which came out on the Xbox 360, and that was my introduction to the franchise. I am currently replaying it on the Switch. I had to actually jump through some hoops to figure out how to download it from the Japanese eShop because they've never released it in the West. And I'm playing that while I'm playing that and Earth Defense Force 4.1 on my Steam Deck while I'm waiting for Earth Defense Force 6 to get a Western release. because it came out in Japan last year, and here I am, still waiting very, very patiently. So yeah, that's me. Go play Earth Defense Force. You won't regret it. Last question of the day, because this podcast is already way too long. Betik, another regular from our podcast, hello, our Discord server, hello, sir. Assuming you were A, willing, and B, able to work on game AI, and you had your pick of any project at all, what game's AI or subsystem would you most want to work on, and what would you want to do with/to it? My bonus answer is if I were a competent AI programmer and I had my pick, I'd love to work on the Stellaris AI, because I think with enough work, it could really add a layer to that game's storytelling. So I'll answer this very quickly, because I already know my answer. I would like to work on generating narrative, and I would like to do it in a game that is a wrestling simulator. I would like to work on a wrestling game where we actually embrace kayfabe and we acknowledge that the whole thing is fake. Sorry, spoiler alert. And you're actually deliberately trying to construct interesting scenarios that will result in greater audience engagement and yield more views on all your pay-per-views and what have you. I feel like that's like the untapped wrestling game that has never been made. And if someone has made it, please write in and tell me, because I will go and play it right now. That's my answer. Wrestling games. Wrestling.
I'll be quick because I'm not an AI coder. I am a coder, but I don't really do great AI. It's just random numbers being thrown at things. But if I was a good AI coder, I would to code some decent AI for fighting games. Street Fighter, I'm a huge Street Fighter fan, and for years it's not worth playing against a computer because you learn patterns, and the patterns are very formulaic, and you don't feel like you get a challenge there. And the only way you enjoy fighting games is by playing another human player. If we can get AI to a point where the AI in a fighting game feels like you're playing another human, that would be incredible. That's where I would want my AI coding to go, I guess.
Go for it, Mike.
I think Betik's answer is actually great. I think I would love to work on Stellaris as well. I think the gap between what the game is doing and what the potential that it has is like really big, because Paradox games always have so much potential in them. I'd love to work on that. But I think my other answer would be something like the Hitman games. I've just finished playing Hitman 3, and it's such an interesting game. It's a game about killing people, like assassinating people, but it's really just a social simulation. Like, it doesn't feel like a game about murder at all. It's bizarre. And I'd love to like get involved in those social systems and have some emergent narrative, have some people that feel even more alive and doing more interesting stuff, and of course get some procedural generation in there, because I can't help myself.
God, this is a big question. So I will try to keep it short. Like what Mike just described is kind of what I worked on for my PhD, and I would love to kind of get back in that and fix it up. But if I were to do something new, and the AI system I would like to work on does not exist in a game currently, which is to create a system that models crafting in a way that is more than just another economy system. So, actually have a AI that can handle the different processes, the different materials, and how things change based on those, so you can actually have some emergent crafting happen. That is where I would love to spend some time.
Yeah, I'd love that too.
Awesome. I like that we got 4 completely different answers. That was great. I'm going to have to chew on that further. That wrestling idea has been stuck in my head since I saw Betik's question, and now I'm like, oh man, is this the next thing I actually go and make, is a wrestling simulator? Anyway, but yes, thank you to everyone for submitting your thoughts and feelings to us. Once again, you can do this via the Discord if you are one of our patrons on patreon.com/AI in Games, but also if you email us at branchingfactor@AIingames.com. And with that, I think it's time we bring this episode to a close, ladies and gentlemen. How are we doing? We ready to wrap this up?
Had a great time.
Yeah.
Going to go out and play in the snow, which there is none of.
Is it all melted?
Yeah.
Oh man.
No.
I've been watching the snow falling out my window the whole time. I have no idea if it's laid, so we'll find out. But yes, thank you to all of yourselves for joining us today. Thank you, Anne. Thank you, Mike. Thank you, Quang. Thank you, of course, to George, who had to leave a little bit early because his job is probably enforcing time constraints on him more than ours, as we all go back to work. Thanks, of course, to yourselves out there who watched this or listened to this episode of the podcast. Be sure to rate us on your podcast platform of choice. It's super handy. Once again, if you have comments or questions, reach out to us, branchingfactor@aiandgames.com, or you can just harass me at aiandgames.com on Twitter, Mastodon, TikTok, and what have you. Patrons, just harass me in the Discord. It'll be fine. Of course, once again, that's AI and Games, patreon.com/AI and Games. You can get all our episodes nice and early. You get them ad-free. You get extra opportunities to engage with us. And it's important that I shout out to all our top-tier patrons who support Branching Factor. Our executive producers, that's Scuppy Pup, Brian Umalan, Bernard Werner, who also submitted a question, and Michael Russell. Thank you to everyone, listeners, co-hosts, hosts, submitters of questions, all forms of participants, in being here for Branching Factor. This is us wrapping up episode 5. We'll be back very soon with another episode for your eyeballs and ears. Take care, stay safe. We love you. We'll be back. Bye.
Bye.
See ya.
Bye.
Playing the music. The Branching Factor podcast is hosted and produced by me, Tommy Thompson, with support from Anne Sullivan, George Osborne, Mike Cook, and Quang Yun. Our theme music is provided courtesy of Ben Ridge, and the logo and thumbnail art is thanks to Helen O'Dell. Special thanks to Shraddha Gupta and Phoebe Trigg for their additional production support, and of course, to all of you out there listening. Thanks for joining us for this episode of Branching Factor. Wherever you are in the world, be sure to stay safe, have fun, and we'll be back.